Four encounters, four witnesses who insisted they saw something real. A humanoid in a frozen Finnish forest. A strange craft rising from a Cold War field. A man who claimed he spent 8 years on another world. And a police officer who lost time on the dark road before dawn. Welcome to Strange Encounters. In January of 1970, two experienced outdoorsmen were cross-country skiing through a forest near Imjärvi, Finland. As they paused in a clearing, they heard a strange buzzing sound overhead. Moments later, they watched as a small metallic craft descended into the clearing and a humanoid figure appeared beneath it. On January 7, 1970, two Finnish men went cross-country skiing near the small village of Imjärvi, about 16 kilometers northeast of Heinola in southern Finland. The men were 36-year-old Arno Heinonen and 38-year-old Esko Viljo. Both were experienced outdoorsmen and familiar with the area. The time was approximately 4:45 in the afternoon. It was already getting dark. The temperature was reported to be around minus 17 degrees Celsius. The air was still, and the sky was clear. The two men had paused in a forest clearing when they heard a buzzing sound. Heinonen later described it as mechanical, not like wind or an animal. When they looked up, they saw a bright light moving toward them from the sky. At first, it appeared as a glowing mass, but it rapidly approached and descended. The light slowed and stopped above the clearing. As it came closer, the glow diminished enough for them to see a structured object inside the haze. The object hovered roughly 3 to 4 meters above the ground. They described it as metallic and circular, approximately 3 meters in diameter. It was surrounded by a reddish-gray mist or vapor. The buzzing sound continued while it hovered. From the underside of the object, a bright beam of light extended downward, illuminating a circular patch of snow on the ground beneath it. The beam was narrow and clearly defined. Within that beam, the men reported seeing a small humanoid figure. They described the being as approximately 90 centimeters tall with thin arms and legs. Its face was pale and wax-like in appearance. The nose was described as pointed or hooked. The ears were small. The figure wore what appeared to be a tight, light green coverall. The boots were darker green. The hands were covered by white gloves or gauntlets. On its head was a conical metallic helmet. The humanoid was holding a small black box in front of its body. The box emitted a pulsating yellow light. Heinonen later said the light appeared to intensify and fade rhythmically. Neither man reported hearing speech. There was no direct communication. The being did not approach them. It remained within the illuminated circle beneath the craft. The encounter lasted only a short time, though exact estimates vary. The men stood still and watched. They did not attempt to approach the object. At one point, they reported seeing colored sparks or luminous particles around the beam area. The colors were described as red, green, and violet. The particles appeared to curve or move in arcs before fading. Then, the mist thickened again around the object. The beam disappeared. The humanoid was no longer visible. The craft descended quickly and vanished from sight. The buzzing sound stopped. The forest returned to silence. After the object disappeared, the men began to feel unwell. Heinonen reported numbness in his right leg. He said it became difficult to walk. Both men later experienced physical symptoms in the days and weeks following the encounter. Reported symptoms included headaches, joint pain, swelling, and general weakness. One account states that Heinonen experienced vomiting and passed unusually dark urine shortly after the incident. Some later commentators suggested the symptoms resembled radiation exposure, although no confirmed medical diagnosis established radiation as the cause. The two men eventually reported the encounter. The case was investigated by Finnish UFO researchers and became one of the most well-known humanoid encounters in Finland. Interviews were conducted, and their testimony was documented in Finnish UFO literature. In later years, Arno Heinonen claimed that the experience did not end that day. According to his later statements, he experienced additional sightings and even contact experiences. He described encounters with other beings, including a female entity who allegedly communicated in Finnish and claimed to originate from a distant world described as green and pleasant. These later claims are part of the broader Imjärvi narrative, but they were not witnessed by Viljo and remain tied primarily to Heinonen's testimony. The original 1970 encounter, however, rests on the joint report of the two men observing a hovering craft and a small humanoid figure in a winter forest clearing. No physical trace evidence was officially confirmed. There were no publicly released photographs. The case relies on eyewitness testimony and subsequent documentation by UFO researchers. Over time, the Imjärvi encounter became one of Finland's most cited close encounter cases. It's often categorized as a close encounter of the third kind due to the reported presence of a humanoid entity associated with a craft. For Finland, the case stands alongside a small number of detailed humanoid reports from the late 1960s and early 1970s, a period that saw increased UFO reporting in parts of Northern Europe. The Imjärvi case has several elements that draw attention. There were two adult witnesses, the sighting was close range, a structured craft was described in detail, a humanoid figure was observed under illumination, physical after effects were reported. At the same time, there is no confirmed physical evidence. The medical symptoms were documented only through testimony. Later contact claims came from one witness, not both. As with many classic humanoid cases, the strength of the report depends on the credibility of the witnesses and the consistency of their statements over time. More than 50 years later, the Imjärvi encounter remains one of the most discussed Finnish humanoid reports. It's not widely known in North America, but within Nordic UFO research, it is considered a major case. Whether interpreted as misidentification, psychological experience, or something genuinely unexplained, the core event remains straightforward. Two men in a winter forest reported seeing a hovering craft and a small humanoid figure illuminated beneath it. That is the account as it has been recorded. In the summer of 1952, in the tense early years of the Cold War, an unusual report emerged from the divided heart of Germany. At the time, much of Eastern Germany was under Soviet control. Travel was restricted, information was tightly managed, and many people living in the Soviet zone were deeply wary of drawing attention to anything unusual. Yet one man eventually came forward with a strange account. His name was Oscar Link. Link was 48 years old and had once served as the mayor of the small town of Glimmershausen. By the time his story surfaced, he had already fled East Germany with his wife and 6 children, eventually reaching the West. Once safely outside Soviet control, Link provided a sworn statement describing an incident that had taken place not long before his escape. According to his testimony, the event happened near the small town of Hasselbach, in what was then the Soviet zone of Germany. On the evening in question, Link had been traveling by motorcycle with his 11-year-old daughter, Gabriella. Twilight was settling over the countryside, as they rode along a rural road. Then, suddenly, the trip was interrupted. One of the motorcycle's tires blew out. With no easy way to continue riding, Link left the motorcycle by the roadside and began walking with his daughter toward Hasselbach. As they made their way along the road, Gabriella suddenly pointed towards something in the distance. Roughly 140 meters away, something lay in a clearing. In the dim light of twilight, Link first assumed it was nothing more than a young deer grazing in the field. But as he walked closer, he began to realize what he was seeing was not an animal at all. From about 50 meters away, he could make out two human figures. The men appeared to be bent over something on the ground, studying it closely. Curious, Link moved closer. When he reached a point about 10 meters away, he looked over a small fence that separated him from the clearing. What he saw there would stay with him for the rest of his life. Resting in the clearing was a large metallic object. Link later estimated its diameter to be between 13 and 15 meters. The shape reminded him of something simple and familiar, a huge frying pan lying upside down on the ground. Around the outer edge of the craft were two rows of evenly spaced openings. Each hole appeared to be roughly 30 centimeters in diameter, forming a ring around the perimeter. The two rows were separated by a narrow band of metal, giving the craft a patterned appearance along its edge. Rising from the top of the object was a black conical tower about 3 meters high. The two men he had seen earlier were standing near this structure. Link studied them carefully. They appeared human, but their clothing was unlike anything he had ever seen. The garments were described as shiny and metallic, reflecting the fading light of evening. One of the men seemed to have a device or lamp mounted on the front of his chest. It flashed intermittently, producing bursts of light at regular intervals. Link watched silently from behind the fence, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then the quiet moment was broken. Behind him, his daughter Gabriella called out to him. The sound of her voice carried across the clearing. The two men reacted instantly. Without hesitation, they rushed toward the conical tower and climbed onto it. Within seconds, both disappeared inside the structure. What happened next unfolded quickly. The ring of openings along the side of the craft began to shimmer. At first, the metal surface glowed faintly green, then the color shifted toward red. At the same time, Link heard a low humming sound growing steadily louder. The conical tower that had stood upright on top of the craft began to slide downward, retracting smoothly into the center of the object. Moments later, the entire craft began to move. Slowly at first, it lifted from the ground. As it rose, the object began rotating, spinning gently like a child's top. Link described the motion as strangely controlled and mechanical. For a moment, it appeared as though the craft was supported by a cylindrical column extending down from its center to the ground. But then this structure retracted as well, disappearing back inside the craft. As the humming sound intensified, a ring of flames appeared around the object. The craft climbed higher into the air, and the rate of ascent increased. Link and his daughter both heard a whistling sound, similar, he said, to the sound made by a falling bomb. The object tilted at a horizontal position and began moving away from the clearing. It headed toward the direction of a nearby town before gaining altitude and vanishing beyond the wooded hills. Within moments, it was gone. Later, other residents in the area reported seeing a strange object in the sky around the same time. Several people believed they had witnessed a comet traveling unusually low across the horizon. A shepherd in the region described seeing what he thought was a comet moving away from the same hill where Link had been standing. But for Link, the story did not end with the object's departure. After the craft disappeared, he cautiously approached the clearing where it had landed. In the ground was a circular opening. The soil appeared freshly disturbed, as though something had pressed into the earth. According to Link, the hole matched the shape and size of the conical structure he had seen on top of the craft. The discovery left him shaken. Up to that point, he had almost convinced himself that the experience might have been a misunderstanding, or perhaps some strange trick of the fading light. But seeing the mark in the ground changed that. To him, it meant that whatever he had witnessed had physically been there. When Link eventually escaped East Germany and told his story in the West, he made one final remark that investigators found particularly interesting. He said that at the time of the encounter, he had never even heard the term flying saucer. Because of this, his first thought had not been extraterrestrial visitors. Instead, he believed he had stumbled upon a secret Soviet military machine, and that possibility frightened him. During those years, people in the Soviet zone understood that certain things were not meant to be seen. Link later admitted that he had been deeply afraid after the encounter. He knew that if what he had witnessed truly was some kind of experimental device, the authorities might not welcome witnesses. His decision to remain silent at the time may have been motivated as much by fear as by disbelief. In the decades since, the Hasselbach encounter has remained one of the more unusual reports to surface from Cold War Europe. It contains details that investigators often look for in credible sightings: multiple witnesses, close proximity to the object, and the report of physical traces. At the same time, it emerged from a period when experimental aircraft, rocket technology, and classified research were rapidly advancing on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Whether Oscar Link and his daughter witnessed an unknown aircraft, a misidentified natural phenomenon, or something far stranger remains an open question. But for one evening in rural East Germany, a former mayor and his young daughter watched a silent machine rise from a forest clearing and vanish into the twilight sky. And whatever it was, it left an impression that followed them long after they had crossed the border to freedom. In the spring of 1970, a strange story began circulating among UFO researchers in Spain. It came from the countryside near the town of Vic in the Catalonia region north of Barcelona. Quiet farmland, small villages, low hills. At night, the roads were empty and the fields stretched for miles. Almost no lights, just the darkness and the open air. The witness was a young man named Julio Garcia. There was something unusual about him. He was deaf and could not speak, and yet the story that would later emerge from his experience, well, it was one of the strangest contact claims in European UFO history. The encounter reportedly happened on the evening of March 28, 1970. Garcia was walking alone along a narrow path toward the fields outside Vic. The sky was dim, the air still, and then he saw it. In a clearing nearby sat something that clearly did not belong there. A metallic object, half of a sphere, smooth, featureless, resting directly on the grass. From a distance, it looked almost like a silver dome had been quietly placed on the earth. It made no sound, no engines, no lights flashing, no smoke, nothing. He stepped closer, cautious, heart beating a little faster, and then he realized he wasn't alone. Two figures stood near the craft. They were tall, covered in dark hair, their movements deliberate, almost mechanical, and their hands, the ends weren't fingers at all. They looked like suction cups. They didn't attack, didn't shout, or make a sound. Instead, they moved slowly toward him. Gestures, invitations, they wanted him to follow. Nearby stood a third figure. It was different, rigid, mechanical. Some versions describe it as a robot, accompanying the two beings, a silent guardian. And somehow, despite the obvious language barrier, Garcia understood. He followed them toward the dome craft. Inside, the interior was nothing like a cramped cabin. The walls curved smoothly, glowing softly without lamps. Strange equipment filled parts of the space, though its purpose was impossible to tell. He had stepped into another world, almost literally. The craft lifted off quietly, smoothly. No roar, no tremor, just a gentle ascent, and soon the countryside of Catalonia disappeared beneath them. Where it went next is almost impossible to describe. According to Garcia, the craft traveled far beyond Earth, to another world entirely. The landscape was alien, strange terrain, unfamiliar structures, a place unlike anything he had ever seen. And then came the extraordinary claim. He spent 8 years there, 8 years living among the beings who had taken him. Communication didn't happen with words. It was instinctive, telepathic maybe. He observed their lives, their environment, their technology, though much of it remained beyond his understanding. Eventually, he says, the beings returned him to Earth. The craft arrived back at the same fields outside Vic. He stepped out, and here's the part that boggles the mind. 8 years had passed for him, but on Earth, almost no time at all. Some versions of this story go even further. They claim that while Garcia was living on the alien world, a duplicate, a clone of him, remained on Earth, living his life so that nobody noticed he had disappeared. This detail does not appear in the earlier summaries of the case. Many researchers believe it was likely added later as the story circulated through magazines and catalogs. Which brings us to the source claim. The Vic encounter appears primarily in UFO catalogs compiled years after the event. Detailed investigative reports are missing. Police records, official files, original field notes, none have surfaced publicly. Most information comes from later European humanoid encounter listings and eventually UFO magazines. By the time it reached online archives in the 1990s and 2000s, some versions included new details, like the clone or more elaborate descriptions of the alien world. So we are left with something unusual, a story that has persisted through decades of retelling with core elements fairly consistent: the landed craft, the hairy beings, the robot companion, and the long stay on another world, but with later embellishments that are difficult to verify. Despite that, it remains a remarkable story. It appeared at a time when UFO reports were shifting from sightings of lights and craft to encounters with non-human beings, sometimes involving extended contact and sometimes involving time distortions. Whether Garcia's experience reflects a genuine event, a misunderstanding, or the natural evolution of a story passed through UFO literature, we can't say for certain. But it is a story that sticks. A man who claimed he left Earth for 8 years and returned to find that almost no time had passed at all. In the early hours of November 28, 1980, Police Constable Alan Godfrey was finishing a routine night shift in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. It had been raining heavily. Just before dawn, he was driving along Burnley Road, searching for several cows reported missing from a nearby farm. The road was wet, the town quiet, the shift nearly over. Then he saw something in the roadway ahead. At first, he assumed it was a bus a vehicle that normally passed through around 5 a.m. But as he approached, it became clear this was no bus. Hovering low above the road was a large metallic object, oval in shape with a dome top. Along its outer edge appeared to be a row of windows or portholes. The object was rotating rapidly, fast enough that nearby bushes were shaking in the turbulence. Godfrey stopped his patrol car. On the dashboard was a sketchpad used for accident reports. He propped it against the windscreen and began drawing what he was seeing. A disciplined response from a trained officer. Then, a brilliant white light engulfed him. The next thing he remembered, he was driving again. But now he was approximately 100 yards further down Burnley Road. The object was gone. He turned around and returned to the location. The road surface was soaked from the night's rain, except for one circular patch directly beneath where the object had hovered. That section of tarmac was dry, marked with a distinct swirling pattern. Back at the station, he realized the time was later than expected. Estimates suggested up to 15 minutes unaccounted for. At first, he hesitated to report the incident formally, but that changed when additional sightings came in. A motorist in Cliviger, several miles away, reported a brilliant white object in the sky at roughly the same time. Officers from a Halifax patrol unit conducting a stakeout on the Calder Valley moors also observed a bright blue-white glow descending toward Todmorden shortly before Godfrey's encounter. With corroboration in place, Godfrey filed his official report. The timing is important. Late 1980 saw a significant wave of UFO activity across Britain. Just weeks later, events would unfold at Rendlesham Forest. Todmorden itself had already gained a reputation among researchers as part of what locals called UFO Alley. The case soon drew the attention of investigators, including British researcher Jenny Randalls, who documented it in detail. For months, Godfrey had no memory beyond the light and the displacement down the road, but he began experiencing fragmented impressions, a sense that he had been outside the vehicle at some point. There were also physical anomalies. The soles of his police-issued boots were split, as though they had caught on something and torn. 8 months later, after his conscious testimony was fully recorded, he agreed to undergo hypnotic regression. Under hypnosis, he described the object disabling his engine and filling his radio with static. A beam of light lifted him upward. He found himself inside a room that felt more domestic than mechanical. A large black dog was present. He encountered a tall, heavily bearded, human-like figure who communicated telepathically and identified himself as Joseph. The figure wore flowing robes described as biblical in style. Assisting him were smaller entities, child-size, with head shaped like a lamb. According to the regression account, Godfrey was examined and questioned. He was told he had met this being before and would again. Then the memory ended. The encounter is classified as a close encounter of the fourth kind, an alleged abduction, and includes several elements that have made it enduring: a police witness, contemporaneous sketches, trace evidence, missing time, and independent corroborating sightings. Just as important is Godfrey's own position. He consistently maintained that the sighting itself, the object, the light, the displacement, was real. But he openly questioned the abduction narrative recovered under hypnosis. He never claimed certainty about what occurred during the missing time. That restraint has given the case unusual credibility. He did not sensationalize his experience. The aftermath, however, was difficult. When a national tabloid ran the story, He was called before his superiors and required to undergo psychological evaluation. He was declared fit for duty. Years later, after sustaining an unrelated injury in the line of duty, he resigned from the force. More than 4 decades later, the Todmorden encounter remains one of Britain's most discussed UFO cases. It stands at the intersection of physical trace evidence, multiple witnesses, and the complexities of memory. The core event, a trained police officer stopping his car to sketch a structured craft hovering over a rain-soaked road, is simple and direct. Everything beyond that is open to interpretation. And that tension between what was clearly observed and what may have happened in those missing minutes is exactly why the case continues to be examined today. These witnesses described events they could never fully explain. Thanks for listening, and if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and hype the video. Until next time, keep looking up.